All right, so in this lesson, we're going to talk about dividing decimals by decimals. And so your goal is I can determine the quotient of two decimals. So remember that the word quotient means the answer to a division problem. And that's going to come up here again in just a second, but it's very important to remember. Also remember that product means the answer to a multiplication problem. Sum means the answer to an addition problem, and difference means the answer to a subtraction problem. Okay, so quick review of some words here. So here I have a basic division problem set up with some whole numbers. So the dividend is the number that you're actually dividing into, and that's going to be the number on the inside. So in this setup here, 24 is the dividend, okay? So that's our dividend. Then you have something called the divisor, and the divisor, that's going to be the number on the outside. That's the number that you divide by. That's telling you how many parts you're going to chop into. Okay? And then last but not least, you have the quotient, and that's what we just talked about. Your quotient is what's going to end up on top, and that's going to be the answer to the division problem. Now, when we divide decimals by decimals, we are eliminating remainders of any kind. We're no longer going to have remainders. Remainders are no longer going to exist. Okay? Now, really quick, before we get into this, I want to remind you of your rules with negatives. So when you have a positive divided by a positive, that's going to equal a positive. When you have a negative, divided by a negative, that's also going to equal a positive. That's same sign. Now, when you have a different sign, you'll have a positive divided by a negative, which is going to equal a negative, or you'll have a negative divided by a positive, which is a negative. So keep those in mind as we go through. So step one is you have your setup here. You have 3.60 divided by 1.2. Now, you set it up and you have this 1.2 on the outside. Well, the rule is that you're not allowed to have a decimal on the outside of your division problem. So step one is going to be to move the decimal point in the divisor to the right until a whole number is formed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this decimal and I'm going to move it once to the right so that this 1.2 becomes a 12. But I need to remember how many times I moved the decimal. So in this case, I moved it once. Now on the outside, I'm going to have a 12. Now, step two. As many times as I moved it on the outside, I'm going to repeat that process with the decimal on the inside. So on the inside, it was 3.60. Now it's going to become 36.0. So step two says move the decimal point in the dividend to the right the same number of times as the divisor. Now it's at this point that I would definitely recommend that you rewrite the problem. A lot of people like to just sort of keep their little squiggly lines and keep going. I would rewrite the problem. So you would rewrite it as 12 on the outside and 36.0 on the inside. All right. Now, step three, you're going to bring the decimal point straight up to the roof, boop, and divide like normal. Okay, so let's go ahead and divide this one like normal. So 12 goes into 3, 0 times 12 is 0. Subtract 3 minus 0 is 3. Bring down the 6. 12 goes into 36 3 times. 3 times 12 is 36. Subtract 0. But I'm going to bring down that 0. 12 goes into 0. 0 times. Subtract. So my answer is 3.0 or just 3. So let's go ahead and try the first problem. So here I have a positive divided by a positive. Now, this first number is always the one that goes inside the division bar, okay? So I have 7.7, and on the outside I have 0.7. Now, this cannot be a decimal, so I have to move it over once. And so I move that over once, I have to move that over once. And it's at this point that I highly recommend rewriting. So now I have 7 on the outside and 77 on the inside, okay? So 7 goes into 7 one time. 1 times 7 is 7. Subtract. Bring down the 7. 7 goes into 7 one time. Subtract 0. Your answer is 11. All right. Now I have a negative divided by a negative. So my answer is going to be positive. Remember that the first number is the one that goes inside the division bar. So I have 4.2, and on the outside I have 0.06. Now I have to move this 2 times. 1, 2. So I'm going to move it here. 1, 2. In this empty spot, I need to put a 0 as a placeholder. I can't just move it once because I only have one number. I have to move it an equal number of times that I moved it on the outside. And then a decimal goes at the end. So on the outside, I now have 6. And on the inside, I have 4, 2, 0. Pop my decimal up. All right, so 6 goes into 4. 0 times 6 is 0. Subtract. Bring down the 2. 6 goes into 42 7 times. Subtract. Bring down that 0. And you'll see that that 0 becomes very important. 6 goes into 0 0 times. Subtract. I have no more numbers to bring down, but that's fine because I'm at a 0. Now, the answer to this is 70. But if I didn't add that other 0 in there and I just left it as 42, my answer would have been 7, which would have been incorrect. All right, next one. Now here I have a positive divided by a negative, and so my answer is going to be negative. And so what I like to do so that I don't forget is I write myself a note. Now, the 12.1 is going to go inside, and the 1.1 is going to go outside. So this guy gets moved once, this guy gets moved once. I have 11 on the outside, I have 121 on the inside. Oops, with the decimal, pop it to the roof. So 11 goes into 1 0 times, subtract, bring down the 2. 11 goes into 12 one time, subtract, bring down the 1, and 11 goes into 11 one time. Subtract 0. Nothing else to bring down. Now, my answer is negative 11 because if I go back up to my problem, I had a positive divided by a negative. So here I have a positive divided by a positive. So my 1.4 goes inside the division bar. My 0.7 goes outside. So I move this to the right once. This guy goes to the right once. So I have 7 on the outside, 14 on the inside. This one's pretty easy. 7 goes into 1. Oops, and I have my decimal. I always forget my decimal. 7 goes into 1 0 times. 0 times 7 is 0. Subtract. Bring down the 4. 7 goes into 14 twice for 0. So my answer here is 2. All right, here we go. We're going to step it up a little bit now. So 5.2 goes on the inside, and you'll notice this is positive divided by a positive, and 0.5 on the outside. So this is going to move over to the right once. This is going to move over to the right once. So I have 5 on the outside, 52 on the inside with my decimal, pop it up to the roof. Now, 5 goes into 5 one time. Subtract. Bring down the 2. 5 goes into 2 0 times. Now, I don't have anything to bring down, so I add a 0 and I bring it down. 5 goes into 20 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. And now I'm good. So here my answer is 10.4. All right, now let's try this one. So here I have a negative divided by a positive. So I'm going to write myself a note that the answer is going to be negative. So I have 11.1 on the inside, and I have 0.03 on the outside. So always move the outside. That one moves twice, so this is going to move 1, 2. I'm going to have to add a 0 there. So I have 3 on the outside, and I have 1, 1, 1, 0, decimal, pop it up. All right, so 3 goes into 1 0 times. Subtract, bring it down. 3 goes into 11 3 times. Subtract, bring it down. 3 goes into 21 7 times. Subtract, bring down the 0. And 3 goes into 0 0 times. And nothing else. So my answer here, and I believe it was negative, yep. So it's going to be negative 370. All right, next one. So I have a positive divided by a negative. So again, my answer here is going to be negative. So I have 1.23, that's on the inside. And I have 1.5, that's on the outside. Move my decimal to the right once, so I move it to the right once inside. Now I have 15 on the outside, and on the inside I have 12.3. Pop that decimal up to the roof. So 15 goes into 1 0 times. Subtract, bring down the 2. 15 goes into 12 0 times. Subtract, bring down the 3. How many times does 15 go into 123? Well, let's try. Let's start with 15 times 7, 35. That's 105. What about 15 times 8? All right, looks like it's 15 times 8 for 120. Subtract, I'm going to have to add a 0, bring it down. And remember, the reason why I'm adding a 0 is I'm not allowed to have a remainder 3. I need to keep going until I zero this thing out. So how many times does 15 go into 30? Twice. And now I zero it out. So my answer, I believe it was negative. Yep, so negative 0.82. And the way that you say that is negative 82 hundredths. All right, go ahead and try these 3 on your own. All right, if you're not done, hit pause, and if you are done, we can go over it. So the first one was a negative divided by a negative, so your answer would have been positive, and it should have turned out to be positive 11. The second one, you had a positive divided by a positive, so you moved the decimal over in the 0.05 twice, and you moved it over in the 12.5 twice, and so you should have gotten 250, again, positive 250. And then in the next one, you had a positive divided by a negative, so your answer should have been negative, and it should have turned out to be 12.4. All right, that is the end of this lesson. We will do much more practice in class with it.